Hey guys, this is Tommy from the Ravens Creek study, and we're looking at the Biblical Theology 101 course. This is an overarching view of the Bible and trying to understand what the whole of the Bible teaches. We've come to understand the advent of Christ in the last video. Now that we've seen his birth and what his birth signifies, what's so important about the life of Christ? Because you've got a lot of things that happen both in the life and the teachings of Jesus before we come to his death. So let's focus in on that and ask the question of what's significant about the life of Christ. And like I said, this is a biblical theology 101. So we're not going to look at all of his teachings and all of the different events of his life. We're just going to kind of put an overview of it. This will it's not even going to solve the problem of like the synoptic problem, if you know what that is. We're just getting at really basic thoughts here. So, the life of Christ. It is important that we not simply focus upon Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. I explained this in the last video. His birth is monumental, but even on Christmas or our sermons are often about the cross. Easter is also paramount, but even our sermons on Easter seem to be about the cross instead of resurrection. This is just a general pattern that I've seen. There we go. Okay, so Jesus' life parallels the story of Israel. You find this specifically in Matthew, but you can find this throughout the Gospels. You have, for example, Abraham is given a promise. You're going to have a son. Sarah's been barren. They're both way up there in years. Their age is ridiculously high, and God's promising them a son. Isaac was born in a miraculous manner. So is Jesus. It's a virgin who gives birth. So just like the womb of Sarah was dead, here we find Jesus' birth is quite miraculous. Israel went down into Egypt, so does Jesus. Jesus goes, he flees Herod. I guess Joseph takes the child and flees to Egypt from Herod. Pharaoh killed the Hebrew children. Herod kills all of the children of Bethlehem 2 and under. Israel was, quote, baptized in the Red Sea. Jesus is baptized by John the Baptist in the River Jordan. And this is when they come out of Egypt, and when you read Matthew, you see the progression. Jesus comes out of Egypt, you then have John the Baptist, and Jesus gets baptized by John the Baptist. It's the exact same progression. Israel suffers 3 temptations in the wilderness. Jesus, after getting baptized, is led by the Spirit into the wilderness after 40 days, which might mirror the 40 days it took to go from the Red Sea to Sinai. After 40 days, Jesus is tempted 3 times. Israel receives the law at Sinai in Matthew 5. Jesus goes up on a high hill, or a high mountain is actually what Matthew uses, the word mountain. And he starts to expand and explain the law. So you've got this parallel between Jesus' life and the story of Israel. From this, do I have it here? Yeah, from this we can create a saying here, kind of a hermeneutic tool. As with Israel, so with Messiah. As with Messiah, so with Israel. So not only does Jesus' life reflect Israel's story of redemption, but Israel's prophesied future is to mirror Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. There's a pattern that's being established here. As with Israel, so with Messiah. So we saw Israel came out of Egypt and was taken to Sinai and eventually come to the promised land. So with Messiah. As with Messiah, that Jesus has his birth, his life, his death, burial, resurrection, ascension, so with Israel, that they shall also have to endure a Calvary road, a death, a resurrection. Okay? And I don't know if we're going to get into that or not. We probably will when we start to talk about the eschatology of the New Testament to be able to bring this forward even further. Jesus' life in the Gospels is ordered in a manner to speak a certain purpose. So what's the synoptic problem? When you read the synoptic Gospels, which are Matthew, Mark, and Luke, synoptic because they bear a lot of similarities, there's a, quote, problem that emits. It's a problem of chronology, It's a problem of teachings that don't agree exactly. Did Jesus say it this way or that way? Did Jesus teach this at that time or at that time? You know, when you compare Matthew and Luke, you find this actually quite heavily. But even when you throw Mark in the mix, Mark doesn't agree with Matthew or Luke in certain areas. So there's a quote problem, and how do you solve it? Are the gospel writers in error? Is there an error here? Well, what's important to realize is that chronology does not matter at all. What matters is the whole point of the story, not chronology. Okay, so the whole point of the chronology in the Gospels is actually to support the story and the whole intention of the story. What is it that Matthew's trying to emphasize? What is it that Mark is trying to emphasize? What is it that Luke is trying to emphasize? What is it that John is trying to emphasize? Why do you have Jesus clearing the temple at the beginning of John, but at the end of Matthew, Mark, and Luke? Is it two clearings of the temple, or are they the same, but they have two different reasons for why they would put them where they do? Why do you have Satan tempting Jesus, and in Matthew, it's turn these stones into bread, and then throw yourself down from the temple, and then taking him up to the high mountain to tempt him, to show him, you know, here you can have all of these kingdoms of the world. When you go to Luke, the last two are switched. It's turn these stones into bread, then taking him up into the sky somewhere, just up. It doesn't even say onto a mountain, just upward, and showing him all the kingdoms of the world. And then the third temptation is to cast himself down from the temple. So why do you have these differences in chronologies? Why is it that when you look at Matthew 5 through 7, you have the Sermon on the Mount, and it's one big sermon, but when you look at Mark and Luke, these teachings are kind of scattered throughout the Gospels. They're not all centered in one concentrated sermon. What's happening here? There's a reason that Matthew does this and Luke does that. It's to bring out the whole purpose of their writing. They're writing for a specific purpose. There's a reason behind what they say and why they say it here and not there. And that when you realize that, it suddenly solves the synoptic problem. Suddenly it's no longer a problem. The question is no longer, well, how do we figure out what the order is supposed to be? Suddenly the question now, well, what is Matthew trying to get at then? Do you see how that changes everything in our focus? Why put things in that particular order, whether stories or teachings? The significance of Jesus' life, then, is that within the stories and parables are patterns, eternal events. They're monumental moments. They map out for us a bigger picture and a bigger understanding. Somehow, Jesus, I'll just read the statement here. Somehow the man is the message, and so his life is a reflection of his teachings. So somehow Jesus isn't just teaching, but his life itself is the teaching. Somehow it's not just about what Jesus says or what he proclaims or what he says is going to happen. Somehow, even within the life of Jesus, we have all of the things that he's teaching concretely portrayed. So you could even skip over the teachings of Jesus, and through understanding his life events, you can understand all the things that he stands for and all of the things that he teaches. Now, I don't suggest doing that, but you have this, and there's a reason for it. It's so that those who want to know God and want to know what God teaches, want to know what God plans and purposes, they can read the Bible and they can find it, even if they're not theologians and even if they don't necessarily know all the different terminologies and all the different things that people teach in seminary. You can learn this is what God says, even if you don't have the whole of the Bible or the whole of the New Testament or the whole of whatever, because there are these patterns. So that's the significance of the life of Christ, is to be able to explain to us God's purposes and God's teachings and God's understanding, God's perspective, both through his life and through his teaching. So next time we're going to look at the cross. I haven't even started putting the slides together for the cross and the significance of it. So it might be a couple weeks before that even gets published, but that's okay. Until next time, grace and peace to you.